Hello, everyone. Welcome to the show. This week, we're talking to Hallerin Hilton Hill. Hallerin is a broadcaster, storyteller, and overall communicator. We talk about the importance of storytelling in life and how story has united people of all backgrounds throughout history. We also get into staying positive when things aren't going that well. I think you're really going to get a lot out of this episode. Remember, if you like what we're doing here at Happiness Sold Separately, please consider helping us out by subscribing and sharing the podcast. It would mean so much to us. Okay, that's enough from me. Enjoy the show.
Auto sequence start in 5, 4, 3, 2, 1.
And now, on with the show.
My name is Hallerin Hilton Hill, and happiness is gratitude.
All right, Hallerin Hill, thank you so much for jumping on the show. Greatly appreciate it.
I'm honored that you would ask me to be a part of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, we've known each other for a while, and there's a lot of ways that I know can describe you. Your friend, husband, father, host, broadcaster, speaker, motivator, overall communicator, storyteller. One thing I know we have in common is the love for a great story. Did you grow up with a lot of great storytellers around you?
Yes. My mother was a great storyteller. I remember she did the children's story at church routinely, and she was a teacher. And I think she figured out early on that one of the most sticky ways to communicate is through stories. And so she could captivate restless children with a great story. And so I was one of those. And we had a series of books called Uncle Arthur's Bedtime Stories. And we would read those stories. She would read them to me. I would read them to her. So story became a huge part of my life. And then in the work that I do as a communicator, story is the thing. And I do a lot of workshops with corporations, helping people get better at communicating. And one of the modules we do is about story. So yeah, story is a big deal.
When you were a kid coming up, did you find the importance of story then, or did it take you a little while? Was it just, oh, mom's telling another story, or did you see that importance in that?
I saw it early on because I loved what it did to my imagination. And so I had some really rough parts of my childhood, and it was the ultimate escape, really. It was a wormhole, if you will, into another dimension. You could leave whatever the pain was you were dealing with, and stories would transport or teleport you to different places where you could know something different, be something different, do something different. So I think I recognized that early on. And then stories also, I learned to use my imagination pretty early on. And so making stories was really important to me. But, I don't know that anybody's ever talked to me about it like this in this depth. And I don't know that I've reflected deeply on story in my childhood, but it probably was the essential thing. I was drawn to Disney would make these albums of the movies that they had put out. So Jungle Book and and they would put them on vinyl. And I remember listening to the stories on those records. And then there were great radio shows. There was a Christian radio station that was, I think it was out of Wheaton, Illinois, out of a Bible college there. And I think I may be wrong about this, so please fact check me, but it was called Unshackled. And it was just magnificent storytelling. And so, yeah, I recognized it early.
And even even in the Bible too, there's so many great stories, and that we have to imagine those. I mean, there've been a lot of great movies and television shows to kind of capture that, and what we think it would have been like. But I think going back, that's even some of the early stories that we have, and it's kind of formed us, as we come up to and Bible school, and then on into church as well.
Yeah, the greatest teacher in the history of teachers in the history of history arguably could be Jesus.
Yeah.
And, he probably could use any modality of communication, known or unknown, and he chose story.
Yeah.
So I mean, that's the one thing that really connected me was, how do you take the biggest principles and reduce them to their most simple and sticky form, and then make them go viral through generations?
Mm.
And it was stories, right?
Yeah.
And if you think about a world, literacy is a recent thing in world history. The majority of the world since its beginning was illiterate. Nobody could read nor write, right? So, you would have to have scripture read to you. You couldn't read a scroll or read a Bible. There weren't printing presses, and literacy was not there. So information was transferred through generations through story.
Mm.
And
So true. I mean, it's almost like when you hear a story, it's uploaded into your mind, so you carry that with you, and you can, during hard times, you can reflect on that. You can pass it along. I'm sure through the generations, some stories get embellished, so they're changed a little bit, but it is such an amazing element that sticks with the generations, because I know growing up, and you probably the same way, you heard your mother, grandmother talk about things that happened to them when they were kids, and they've heard things before and their grandparents. So it connects you as a family and as a community, I think.
Yeah, big time. And even the notion of embellishment is really a new generation or a new person taking ownership or putting their stamp or participating. And so I became fascinated about story early on, but then in my professional career, I started to really study story. I don't know that I've become terribly good at it, but I've spent a lot of time thinking about and studying story. So I've run into some of the greatest storytellers alive. I've been to the National Storytellers Festival. I've taken some seminars and courses just on story. Specifically, I started to look at screenwriting, because writing for the screen, you have to write for the imagination, because when you're writing a screenplay, you have to not only write dialogue, but you have to write scenes. And so you have to think about all of it. You have to engage the entire imagination. And that's been one of the most fascinating journeys. And then as a songwriter, story is at the center of some of the greatest songs. So yeah, I get pretty excited about this.
Yeah, and in a song, you have to tell that story in 3 or 4 minutes, right? So you have to condense that, which is even harder, I would imagine.
It is. You know what? The constraint of time forces clarity of thought. So if you're speaking or presenting, I've got to do a major presentation to a big group of executives soon, and I'll be working with them for about 2 hours. And there's a lot of preparation that goes into making something flow for 2 hours. There's a design to it. And it takes a lot of preparation. And to anybody that's thinking about stories, storytelling, presentation, one thing I would ask you to do is just fall in love with preparation, fall in love with it, embrace it. Um, Put the time in so that you have the freedom that is born of a deep understanding of your source material. Um, don't memorize, internalize.
Mm.
2 hours that's a lot. 4 hours
That's a lot.
every day on the radio is a lot. 4 hours on the radio every day for 44 years is a lot
That's a
of
lot. That's a lot of
communicating.
stories. What is
But
it
what's
about? Like,
harder, what's harder though, is 10 minutes.
yeah.
A well-reasoned, well thought out 10 minutes is harder than 2 hours. A well-reasoned 3 minutes is harder than 10
Mhm.
because you have to have clarity, because
Mhm.
every story has a beginning, a middle, and an end. It has a main character, it has a setting, it has crisis, and it has resolution. And to try to make all of that happen in a very small space of time forces you to get really clear and creative. So I always tell people, when you are developing material, the best thing you can do is start with a single sheet of paper. You have to be able to condense the whole story. You take a single sheet of paper, unfold it into thirds, and 1/3 is act one, 1/3 is act two, 1/3 is act three. And you have to be able to outline the entire story on a single sheet of paper. If you can't do that, you don't have the clarity to actually build something that will stick. But if you have that clarity, you can reduce it to 3 minutes or 3 hours, but you have to have that spine, that structure. Sorry for nerding out, but
No, I'm right there with you.
I love
That's
this
yeah.
thing.
I'm right there with you. That's what we try to do, Makash, is we always, no matter what, if we're doing a corporate video or pitching to a network or a streamer, we always try to find that piece of humanity, an element in the story, so that we can formulate our story around that and get people that may be a corporation, a factory, whatever, nonprofit, get them excited about what story we could tell around them, and almost create a little movie around whatever organization we're pitching to. So story, yeah, I'm right there. I could nerd out with you all day on that. That's I love that. What when you spoke about speaking in front of the executives, what is it about having a group of people that could come from all types of backgrounds, have all sorts of differences? When you get up there and you start telling a story, and you've probably seen people focus in when you start telling a great story, what is it about that that can really just level the playing field and get everybody into that?
I think part of it is, you highlighted something that's super important. If you are telling a story from the place of humanity, there is a universality to humanity. And so if your story is tapped into human experience, this one philosopher I was listening to yesterday said, each one of us has captured within us all of humanity, all human experiences in our DNA. So if something is authentically human, it will connect and relate because it's connecting to that thing inside of you that knows what is human. So I think your point is wise. I think what causes people to tap in is, if you can tap into humanity, if it is the truth or a truth, and then if you understand the dynamics of storytelling, because our brains are wired for story.
Mm.
And if you spend a little time, you guys do this all the time, if you spent a little bit of time developing story, you start to notice it's not so much a formula as it is acknowledging how humans consume story, what they need, and then taking the information you have, not plugging it into a formula, but having the information respect the thing that will best serve the audience,
Mm.
right? And so I think that's what happens in front of executives. If you can, or anybody for that matter, if you can. I had a woman on the show, they call her Miss A. She teaches out in Seymour, and they love her because when she walks into assembly, all of these rambunctious kids, these cell phone generation that has the attention span of a flea, she'll stand in front of them and she tells stories. She lives on a small farm, and she tells stories about her dogs and the chickens, and the dogs chasing the chickens, and within seconds they're brought to that moment. So I think we all crave story. Muriel Rukeyser said the universe is not made of atoms, it's made of stories.
That's brilliant. I mean, we all have this inherent need to connect, and that's in our
Mm.
DNA too. We want to have that human connection. We need it, in our life. I think, one thing about storytelling is it naturally begins conversation, whether it be a communal environment, if you're watching a movie together or you're hearing a great story, conversation always kicks up from that. Did you see that? Or, whatever the story may be. But today, does it ever worry you? Have we lost that ability to have great conversation on the back end of storytelling or stories? I mean, we all have differences. We all have differences of opinion, but to truly listen and then offer communication back, have we lost our way in that?
Yes, absolutely. I think social media has fractured an already fractured attention span. And I think one of the modern luxuries is giving someone your undivided attention. I mean, and so people struggle with being present. Oddly enough, we have an epidemic of loneliness.
Mm.
So we're more connected than ever, but people are more lonely, anxious, and depressed than ever.
Mm.
And
isn't that odd?
Story evolves and creates community, but you have to be present in it for it to work. And I, as I've kind of looked at some of the latest literature on attention span, that's a really big deal. We've lost some of that, and being present and being a great communicator takes intention and presence.
Absolutely. And it's also too, I think we're digesting the wrong stuff. I think a lot of junk food is out there. If that makes sense. I've always believed that division and anger and hate sell. So, we get fed a lot of things on social media that try to stir up emotion and negative emotion, telling us who to blame. And this problem in our life is because of this group of people or that group of people. So I feel like that too drives the problem, because we don't really, all we're fed mostly on social media is that division. I mean, that's what makes money. I mean, I guess it's to keep us all divided.
Yeah. And I don't, I've thought a lot about this. I spent over a decade teaching the book of Proverbs, the wisdom of King Solomon. And there are several chapters where he deals with the power of words, right? The power of words. And one of the things King Solomon said about the words of the wise nourish, or the words of the wise are a tree of life, right? And so, you've been around wise words when you leave nourished. You've been around wise words when you walk away feeling more alive, right? Strategically, though, the algorithm's mission isn't to nourish, it's to keep you there. And so human emotion captures people, and the most dominant emotions are fear and anger. They used to say sex sells. No, fear and anger are the ones that sell. And so it's in the design, and there have been a number of documentaries done about this. But they have really come to understand the reward centers of the brain and how dopamine works and that whole thing. And their aim is not to nourish or to give life. Their aim is to hold you there long enough to turn you into the product.
Mm.
Right.
Wow.
And we're so susceptible to our emotions that if you don't have any time for self-reflection, if you haven't been nourished in a long time, it's like how long it takes for a person to really taste the flavor of whole foods.
Mm.
Like if you've been binging on junk food, broccoli just doesn't taste the same. But if your gut is right and you've been eating clean, you can have a bunch of steamed broccoli and you're like, oh, this is the best thing. And so I think by design, that anger, the rage, I call it the rage industrial complex, really is, and I don't even know that people understand that, but the rage industrial complex really is rooted in manipulation.
Yeah.
How do I stir up your emotions enough to keep you in front of the screen or keep you doom scrolling long enough for me to capture data on you so that I can triangulate advertising or whatever? And I don't think people realize the manipulation of anger. So I got to.
And AI has just doubled down on that because you don't know if it's true or not. I mean, what your eyes are seeing or hearing. I mean, it's scary and amazing what can be done with AI. But I think right now, the big product is the candidate. So you hear all this stuff, and that's the product that we're being force fed every day. So that's just your mind takes on too much, and it's overload.
Sure.
Do you
well-being is a skill.
It
Skills
is,
are
and you have to practice it. Yep, very much so. I mean, do you have you ever seen a time where politically it's a mess that's going on? I mean, we're all feeling it. We had a tragedy, attempted assassination, all this stuff that's going on. Did you ever think we would see in our generation an attempted assassination? I mean, it just blew my mind when that happened. I mean, thank God he's okay, but
yeah, I mean that was tragic, horrible, indefensible, should never have happened. I'm old enough though to have been alive when there was an attempted assassination on Ronald Reagan.
Right.
And so, if you take a wide angle view of America has gone through these ebbs and flows, these cycles of division. I kind of remind people we did have a civil war. Like we have been more divided. I'm old enough to have been around for 9/11. I'm old enough to have been around for a lot of different things. So we have been as divided. The thing that's troubling is after all these cycles of division and somewhat repair, that we haven't learned from previous divisions so that we could be better now, having learned what division cost. Like we haven't learned from it. America has been as or more divided than it is right now. Yeah. Factually, it has been, because a civil war and a president assassinated as opposed to attempted assassination, that's a measure worse. And this was horrible, make no doubt about it. But that's a measure worse. And our entire nation was split apart and was within a breath, really, of collapsing. So we have been more divided. The struggle for us is to mature as a nation such that when we have gone through these cycles of division and repair, that we harvest from those the wisdom that it would take not to have to repeat those cycles. That's the challenging thing, all that we've been through, and we can't go. One thing I love about old folks, wise older people, is their perspective allows them to go through something with you and go, you don't want to do that. I've seen this before, right? the farmers' TV commercials. We know a thing or two because we've seen a thing or two, right?
Exactly.
That, and that's probably the thing where we need the most growth is when we go through periods of trouble, when we go through periods of testing, when we go through trying times. Are we able to use those trying times as a crucible to boil away everything that isn't necessary and to reveal the necessary things and to triple down on the necessary things or to grow and get better?
Wow, that's well said. Definitely. I mean, I got frustrated that after the attempt, when things started to the next couple of days, both sides started to get out
Immediately.
and preach about unity. Why was it too little too late? Why weren't we there before all that happened? I mean,
Right.
so it's frustrating.
Right.
Do you still consider yourself an independent?
Absolutely.
I heard you say something one time on the show, which I just loved, and I still remember that to this day. You said you do not want to wear the dog collar of the RRD around your neck. That leads to people telling you how to think and what
Oh,
you should believe. So kind of reflect on that a little bit, that how you came to that. That's very wise.
it probably would have to start with my father, who I just adore my father. Like he was a human being. He was great and he was imperfect. He was strong and he was weak. And I got to see all of it. But he gave me this tremendous gift. He gave me a love for learning, right? I was socialized around libraries. My dad read a book a week for most of his life. He lived till 86. Even when his eyesight started to fail him, when I would come and visit him, I used to keep a bag of books in the back of my car. And he would always ask me, "What are you reading?" And I'd say, "Well, I'm reading this book or that book." And he would say, "Read it to me." And I'd sit in the upholstered chair next to his bed and I'd read to him. And so I was socialized around learning and libraries and thinking for myself. And my father used to always say, "Son, be original, be original." And so he would always ask me, he always maintained an office in our home. And most times he had a chalkboard up in his office. And if I were to go upstairs to my office and studio here at my house, there's a 20-foot wall in my studio in there, and 16 feet of that wall is whiteboard, right? And just having this conversation with you, I'm thinking about how that all impacted me. But he would always tell me to be an original. I would walk in his office and I would ask him something, and he would say, "What do you think?" And I would go, "Huh?" He'd go, "Tell me what you think about it." And he would encourage me to think a thing through for myself. And he would always encourage me to never surrender that. You know, if we agree on everything, only one of us is doing the thinking, right? And so he didn't believe in just accepting pre-formatted thought that you copy and paste. He wanted you to keep that intellectual rigor, the ability to reason and to think. And so I think that was affirmed in me. But then I grew up as a preacher's kid. I grew up in a very conservative denomination. I've been around very conservative people. And I saw what it was like when you box people in and they don't have the freedom to think for themselves. And I never liked that. And I never liked the notion that you give me a script or a playbook, I have to follow your playbook or talking points, or I don't have any worth to you. It seems antithetical to the notion of freedom. Life, liberty, pursuit of happiness. Pursuit of happiness, life, liberty, all of these things are about being free to think. And one day I was just thinking about it. I was thinking, if you put a collar on my neck and it's a red collar, or if somebody else puts a collar on my neck and it's a blue collar, It doesn't matter the color of the collar. I'm still collared. I'm still on your leash.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter if you put me in gold handcuffs or platinum handcuffs, I'm still handcuffed. If you smack me with a red glove or you smack me with a blue glove, I'm still smacked.
Yeah.
And I remember reading the definition of independent because people would tell me from time to time, oh, you're too squishy, you're too middle of the road, you don't know what you believe. If you don't stand for something, you'll fall for anything. And I remember reading the definition of the word independent. One of the definitions is self-governing, right? My self-governing, by the way, is fully submitted to God. So if God says it, then we got to cut that off. But then probably my favorite original document of American scripture, all of I remember being at the archives in Washington and just being in awe of this ark of documents that are in the rotunda. You have the Constitution there, but you also have the Declaration of Independence. The very spirit of this nation was to be independent. It's a declaration of freedom and independence. And to me, that lines up more with the intent of where we live, but the intent of who we are. So that's why I landed there. And I've seen what power does. It doesn't matter which end of the political spectrum it's on. Power corrupts. It just does. It just has a corrupting effect. And you always have to have a check and balance on that. So
yeah, that goes back to self-reflection too. And wellness, you have to be strong and who you are and know who you are in order not to let that happen.
Right.
And I mean, to your point, that's what we got away from, right? We got away from being told by the king and we were to think for ourselves. That's why we came over here. So
that was the whole thing was the divine right of king says, the blood with which I was born gives me the right to dominate and subjugate you because I said so.
Right.
You will always be at this class or this caste, and there's nothing you can ever do about it because you don't have the right kind of blood.
Right.
That's just, we come to a place where we say, no. It starts with the Magna Carta. It's that whole idea of we hold these truths to be self-evident that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their creator with certain unalienable rights. Among these, life, liberty, the pursuit of happiness. I'm like, yeah, that.
Right. I want that. Our rights come from God and not from whoever's in power.
Not from government. It's not. This idea of independence is in the DNA of the very nation that I live in. So why would I be weird for being an independent?
Right. Exactly. More people should be that way. Well, that's
the
one
most
thing too.
People are. Most people. This is what's interesting is, I think I just saw the most recent numbers. Registered Democrats were at 24%. Republicans were at 24.5 or 25%. But you have 51% of people who are on a spectrum of independence. It's the big chunk in the middle. So,
wow, that's interesting. I wouldn't have thought that, but that's interesting, which is good to hear that so many people are thinking for themselves and looking at both sides, I guess. Your show every day has that open door policy. All ideas are welcome, all thoughts.
Absolutely. Oh, yes.
Did you when you were first getting into broadcasting, did you model the format of the show over things from, like you said, your mom, storytelling, and the idea of thinking for yourself from your dad. Was that kind of molded into what you wanted the show to be? Just sort of a chance for people to call in and discuss all ideas?
Not consciously. I wanted to entertain, inform, inspire, sometimes educate. But I don't know that I had a master plan or a master design. I think that's just was what was native to me. That's what was in me. I have a deep respect for people. Now that I think about it, now that we're having this conversation, I think that's the beginning, middle, and end of how I approach my work. I do something. I do something every day that I love. I actually love it. While I'm doing the show, I have a yellow legal pad. I take notes on every phone call. So the entire time I'm talking to people, if you call me, I'm like, it's 3:42. Jason, I write your name down. And as I'm listening to you, I take notes on what you say. And I do it for two reasons. One is it's a focusing element because people can feel, even without seeing you, whether or not you're really paying attention to them.
That's
right? But I also do it as an act of respect. Like, I really respect my audience. And that respect is not given based on how you treat me. It's given based on the principles by which I live. And I'm not going to change those principles just because you don't like me or just because I'm going to respect you to the limit of my boundaries. Right. But I'm going to give you every ounce of respect I have right up to the limit of my boundaries. Yeah. And I think that was the foundation. That's why I started saying to people, what do you think and why do you think it? I crave conversation and storytelling, though. And I rarely have people who are willing or ready to tell me their why. People will give me their what all the time. But the second or third question in, when we start to plumb down to your why, I don't run into many people who are willing to do that. And I think it's, number one, because people aren't challenged to do that. But every single time somebody takes the next step, and they're not just parroting or regurgitating ideas or talking points that they've absorbed from somewhere else, and they start to really think, every single time somebody feels safe enough to let me into their why, the conversation it just goes and it grows, and other people start to call, and there's a magical thing that happens. On my television show, I've created a safe enough space where people really let me into their why. And it has been a beautiful thing. But I think the foundation for me was the respect. I want to be a great storyteller. I don't think I'm there yet, though. I have a long way to go and a lot to learn to be a much better broadcast storyteller. But I think respect was the foundation. And then my father's desire to have deep conversations with you about your why. Here's another note that I would throw in here. My father never, I say rarely, I don't remember many times where my father talked about other people. He never talked about people behind their back, not even his enemies. My father talked about ideas.
Wow.
And if you try to bring him something that somebody said about him or whatever, his first response was always go, you never know what would cause a person to say something like that.
Yep.
And then he would pivot, and then he would go, what are you reading?
Right.
or he'd say, what are you making?
Because that wasn't important to him. What people thought about him or what they said about him, that probably wasn't important. That wasn't on his radar. He was more interested in ideas.
I think it was on his radar, but I think he found more joy in learning, and he found more paralysis in listening to voices outside of himself that were demeaning. Because if we're honest with each other, we already have a bunch of negative voices in our own head.
Oh yeah.
Why add just me dealing with me and the
Right.
crazy stuff? I always tell people the most hateful things that have ever been said about me have been said by me to me.
Oh yeah.
I wrote this song called Block My View. And then the opening line of the song is, "Who made the mirror? Who would invent such pain?"
That's great. Yeah. I'm right there with you. I don't need a can of kerosene to come into the mix. I'm already
Right.
already beating myself up enough. Do you? I've noticed that about the show. People, some callers are calling and they take the low road or they have all this anger. But I've noticed I've never seen or heard you get upset. You always will allow them to say what they need to say. I'm sure inside maybe it's different, but
No, I've had some days where I just absolutely lost it.
it's got to be difficult to when
Well,
you're dealing with many opinions. It's
you know what? It's not as difficult as I was transformed by the book of Proverbs. I mean, teaching the book of Proverbs. I even wrote a paraphrase of the book of Proverbs. I wrote a book about Proverbs. That it was about a 25-year cycle. I just lived embedded in that. And I was able to fail enough. I was able to fail enough to realize the depth of the wisdom that I was studying. Because it's one thing to read it. I sat down with rabbis and scholars, and in Proverbs you hear about three things. You hear about wisdom, knowledge, and understanding. Chachma, Binah, and Dayat. Dayat is the ability to act on revealed wisdom. It's when it moves from here to your heart, and then it becomes an expression in your life where you act on revealed wisdom. That's the game. You might read 100 proverbs that give you great life instruction, but it's when there's no resistance, when revealed wisdom no longer meets your ego's resistance, and you just act. And that probably, there is so much there about, there's one proverb in the Shapiro paraphrase that says, patience is the greatest strength, self-control the key to success. So, when I studied all of this wisdom, it was all about controlling your spirit and your emotions so that they don't take control of you. And I had so many days where I got hate mail, I've been stalked, I've had death threats, and I would bring that anger home with me, or that fear or that resentment. And then it affects every relationship you're in. But I remember being held hostage by those emotions.
Yeah.
Can't sleep. Somebody said something to you, somebody insulted you, somebody did something to you, and that seed of anger and resentment and fear takes root in you, and it paralyzes. Like it stops you from doing anything else. I used to do this beautiful illustration where I'd take a bunch of clear cups and I would take a bottle full of red liquid, and the cups would represent all of the things you have to do in a given day. And I would pour out a little bit as a representation of the energy those things take. And I would have these, a few cups in front, and they would be like resentment, anger, fear. And I would go, yeah, all of this is going to take energy. And if I pour all of it into the resentment cup or the anger cup, then when it comes time for me to spend time with my family, all of that energy is depleted. now I have nothing to give them. And I lived that experience for a long time where somebody would say or do something to me, I would be offended. The offense would take root and then it would find expression, and it paralyzed me emotionally.
Hmm.
And at some point I started going, wait a minute, this wisdom that tells you, there's a proverb that says it's the glory of a man to pass over an insult. I started to go, why don't instead of being a sponge, why not be a screen? Why not let it just kind of flow through and then move on? And so I've experienced enough of life to realize I can have the conversation with you. We can go back and forth, but at the end of the day, I'm going to let it go. I think too, I've been through a lot of things in my life, to include divorce. And so I know what it can cost you if you don't manage your spirit well, right? It infects and affects everything else. So if you hear me being patient with people, I'm actually in the business of energy conservation.
You're going to need it for something else more important. Yeah. Right. How do you, and you spoke a little bit to that, when things don't go right, when hiccups come up, life is hard, things are going to happen, things you may not have ever imagined would come up. How do you stay focused and stay positive and on the path? I know prayer is going to lead into that a lot, but what else do you do, I guess, to stay on the right path?
I would say the number one intervention and tool is gratitude. That's number one. I love learning. I'm glad to be in this conversation. I'm probably talking way too much.
No, not at all.
But I love learning. Some people like it. I love it. So, last night I was sitting out on my deck listening to a lecture, fascinating lecture. One of the things that I loved studying was positive psychology. And probably the founding father of that field of study is Martin Seligman at Penn. He wrote a book called Flourish. He created the framework that really spawned this new field of psychology that's really kind of found its sea legs in the last 15 to 20 years. He had been head of the American Psychological Association. And when you become president of an organization, you have a 2-year stint. And so you have a theme as president. And as an active psychologist, he was always frustrated with the fact that he would help people get past their dysfunction. But once they got past their dysfunction, they didn't get happier or better. The analogy he uses is you have a flower bed and you go out and you get all the weeds out and get all the rocks out. You bring in some of the finest topsoil available and stand back and watch what happens. And what happens is nothing. Because the absence of trauma or drama or neuroses does not imply the presence of growth or well-being. And that's when he discovered that well-being was a skill. Most people had not developed the skill. So they went along scientifically to discover, scientifically replicable foundations for well-being. What are the people who live with a great sense of well-being? What are they doing? And so the framework is called PERMA, P-E-R-M-A. The acronym is for positive emotions, engagement, positive relationships, meaning and purpose, and then accomplishment. Now they've added a V, vitality. That first one, though, positive emotions, what they found was people who live with a great sense of well-being, they have a great reset button. They understand life ebbs and flows. You're going to deal with difficult things, but they have a strategy they have interventions and strategies for them to press the reset button. What they found scientifically is the most reliable way to press the reset button is through gratitude. It's through gratitude. So gratitude journaling is very powerful. very powerful. And it relates really to the brain and brain development and neural pathways. When you think a thought, you lay down a neural pathway. The more times you think that thought, the stronger that pathway becomes until you're set in that way. And then all it takes is a trigger and you go. Primally, we're wired for survival. So they say you have a basic negativity bias because when we were in the jungle, we were looking for what was going to eat us, or we were looking for something to eat. We don't live that way anymore, right?
Mm-hmm.
So to overcome that primal wiring, you have to rewire the brain. And gratitude is a way to reset the circuits, right, of the brain. And this is one of the most beautiful things I remember learning from him. He said that human beings are not natively Homo sapien, sapien being wise. They're Homo prospectus. They prospect for what they expect based on the way they frame their past and their present. So if your framing of your life, your past is negative, all these things happen to me, not for me. And if you're living your days negatively, when you wake up the next day, we begin this process of prospecting, and we prospect based on what we expect. So if I expect my life to be bad, I look for confirmation of what I believe my truth is, that my life is bad. What happens with the gratitude, interventions is the more you do them, the more it becomes native to who you are. And so after about 67 days, there's a momentum that starts to take place. And the analogy I use all the time, when you buy a certain car, you start to see them everywhere not because they made more of them overnight, your awareness shifts. When you're grateful, you start to say, what am I grateful for today? In gratitude journaling, you not only ask yourself, what are you grateful for, but what would make the day great? So you start to think about how you could have agency in your life and make the day great. But then at the end of the day, you write down, what are the 3 amazing things that happened to me today? And what that does is it primes the mind to look for things for which to be grateful for, to engage your agency to make, right? To make something happen, and then to constantly frame your life as amazing. I have a bad caller today. He insulted me. The other day I was going through some tough stuff, and then I just pulled out a sheet of paper and I decided to draw a timeline of all the crazy stuff I've been through in my life. Like this timeline. And I'm sitting there and I just started thinking this. Well, you made it through that. You made it through that. And you made it through that one. You made it through that one and that one. Dadgummit, you have a history of making it. So this thing that you're concerned about right now, you're going to make it. And you have yeah. So gratitude is the way I do it. I have a habit of being grateful. I start every morning with it. I end every day with it.
How important is writing that down? I know that it takes that, right? You can't just, thinking about it or praying about it is one thing, but when you put that together with writing it and seeing it, there's magic there.
Yeah, there is, and there's no way that I don't know what it is about the actual act of writing, but I think it engages so much of the brain to do this, because so the 5-minute journal, you can get it on Amazon, is pre-formatted for this gratitude journaling, and it's great. But they also have an app, right? And I've used the app, and I've used the notes section of my phone, but my bullet journal, there's just something about the pen and the page, and you'll respect and know this as a storyteller, but I encourage everybody that's interested in storytelling, get a pen and a piece of paper. Everything I do starts analog. It's on a whiteboard, it's on a legal pad, and it's on a Post-it note. Those are the three tools of my trade. And I got tons of technology. I got more technology than I know what to do with. But
Right.
everything is analog, and I love it.
I think I'm the same way. I think sometimes the technology gets in the way a little bit. If it's just you and a legal pad, you can just go. You know, if you've got to do an app, you've got to type and you got to do this and that, download the program. Sometimes that can just get in the way. And if you've got the whiteboard and you have an idea and you get up and you write it down and you see it every day, I've just found that old school way of processing thoughts just really, there's something to that. I think you can always put it in the technology later, but that connection with the writing and thinking and then seeing it, there's something, a nice mixture there.
You know who really reinforced that for me was Jerry Seinfeld. I read this book, I think it's by Oppenheimer, on the life of Jerry Seinfeld. And he would go do these comedy clubs, and the typical life of a comedian is you go to do your comedy set late at night, you hang around at the bar till 3 a.m, go back to your hotel room, you sleep till 3, you get room service, put on your clothes, go do it again. And he was staying in this hotel, he's on a high floor, and he's overlooking a job site, and he sees these construction workers going to work. And they got their lunch pail and their hard hat. He just watched them all day, and they were working. You know, they were doing their work all day long. They took a 30-minute lunch break, and they went right back. And he said, I owe my craft at least as much as a welder on a job site to be at it all day. And he said, so I decided that I was going to dedicate 6 to 8 hours a day to my craft. But he said, I decided I would only use a big pen and a legal pad for 2 reasons. One, there was something focusing about actually writing the words, but 2, he said, you can get a big pen and a legal pad anywhere in the world, right? So there's never an excuse that I couldn't find my charger, the internet went down. And so he said he would sit there and he would record every set and would come back in the morning, put his recorder down, and he would transcribe his set and then go sentence by sentence and rework in hand. The other writer that wrote by hand was the writer Maya Angelou. Maya Angelou wrote every one of her books on a legal pad. Wow. So I was like, well, dadgummit, if the best of the best are doing that, little
Good
buddy, you better get you a legal pad.
Yeah. If that's all it takes, I'm going to go buy some legal pads. If I can be great like that. Hal, thank you so much, man. I know I don't want to take up any more of your time. We've been about an hour, but man, I'm just so blessed for this conversation and blessed to have you as a friend. And thank you for taking your time to spend with me.
Likewise. And I thank you for all you do, and thank you for inviting me on your platform. And I hope that would throw some light into your world and to the people that take a look at this.
Oh, I know it will. Definitely will. A great conversation. Where can people find you? I know, tell them the times of the show, and then on social media, where can people connect with you?
Yeah, I'm not a big social media guy, but in the fall, there'll be more there. The radio show is on News Talk 98.7 FM in Knoxville. But you can find us, if you have a smart speaker, just ask for News Talk 98.7. We're streaming on TuneIn and all of the radio platforms online. Our television show, Anything Is Possible, is on WVLT Saturday mornings at 5:30, and then Sunday it runs twice on WBXX and MyVLT at 9 and noon. We're in our 22nd season of that. And I also have a leadership development and training company called Happogee. Our tagline is joy-infused, purpose-driven, peak performance. And you can find me online at HallerinHill.com. And you'll be seeing more about that. But if you're interested in having somebody come work with your team, especially around the area of communication, I'm happy to do it.
Happiness Sold Separately is created and hosted by Jason Hensley and is produced by Makash Films. Music by Soundstripe. Narration by Lauren Gobis. If you or someone you know is in crisis and needs immediate help, call the National Mental Health Hotline at 866-903-3787. We would be honored if you would rate, share, and subscribe. From the entire Happiness Sold Separately team, thank you for listening.